Hi everyone, good evening. This is Garima here from the iDreamCareer team, welcoming all of you to one of our webinars across this webinar series, which will be dealing with how the situation looks like for fresh graduates in the US after and during this corona crisis. So firstly, welcoming all the eminent school teachers, principals, counselors, students, and everybody else who's here joined us for this webinar. Also, our career counselor community who've been trained and certified through IDC, and all other students who are here today participating in this webinar. First and foremost, while we move into this webinar, just a short introduction of what IDC is and to give you a little insights on the work that we do. So iDreamCareer is a career counseling venture. We are into career counseling for almost 10 years. And the foundation of our career counseling services is that we go ahead and provide unbiased career counseling services. We right now work with multiple state governments. We right now work with a lot of private schools. We work with a lot of NGOs. We work with other educational institutions. To name a few, we work with UNICEF and 9 state governments, Rajasthan, Bihar, etc., etc. We work with private schools, so the Sri Ram School, Sindhya School, Samhita Academy, Kunskap Skolan, Navy Children's School, etc. We also have our own CSR vertical, wherein we have been working with a lot of foundations and doing CSR work and working with a lot of NGOs. So Hero FinCorp, the Sarthi program, the Bharti Foundation, etc., are also associations we have. So with respect to all the audiences who are seeing us on YouTube today, so first and foremost, you would have a YouTube chat option right below the video. So you have our team moderating the chat for you. If you would have any question to ask, please go ahead and just type it down there, and post the session. We'll be taking up all the questions which you have written. In addition, apart from today's webinar, do look out for the webinars that we are planning to hold for this week. So for tomorrow, we have University of Sydney webinar planned, which will cover the admissions and programs processes at the University of Sydney. For the 17th, which is the Friday, we have the ACT team coming across. They will be covering about the ACT test specifically. And on the 18th, we have Mr. Kunal, who's an economist and a columnist. He has somewhere around 20 years of financial research experience, and he'll be there taking the webinar at 12 o'clock on Saturday. So right before we proceed, so first and foremost, I would take this opportunity to thank Kedar specifically for being here. I mean, he has actually woken up very early today to be there and conduct this webinar for all of you here. He's right now operating from the US. So just before I hand over the honors to him, to for all of you to refer to. So basically, Kedar is a research associate who's working in the global public market. He's right now associated with DiMeo Schneider and Associates. He's he's an avid reader. He's a cyclist. He has studied from the Sri Ram School at Gurgaon. He's completed his bachelor's degree in economics and finance from the Northwestern University. Also, his internship experience has been in equities research, portfolio management, and product design. So, Kedar, perhaps you can definitely go forward and let these people know various insights of what you have in store for us today. Thank you.
Sure, it's great to be on. So thank you to the iDreamCareer team for setting this up, and thank you to everyone in the audience for taking the time to join. It's a very uncertain time, so I hope that everyone is safe and healthy with their family and loved ones, whichever part of the globe you might be in. In terms of using this, I want to make sure that this is a useful time for everyone. So we're going to sort of split it up 50-50, the first half covering my experience, my insights, and some data points that I've collected. And then the second half really answering your questions. So whatever comes to mind, please feel free to pop that into the chat, as Garima had mentioned. I'd like to start sharing a short presentation that I've worked on just to encapsulate all of the points. So Garima did a great job of giving a brief background of who I am, where I come from. So I attended school at the Sri Ram School in Gurgaon. Till class 10, I did the ICSE, and my group 3 subject was economics. And then in classes 11 and 12, I did the International Baccalaureate with the subjects you can see on the screen. So my higher levels were physics, math, and economics. And then the standard levels were business, management, English language and literature, and Spanish ab initio. So after completing my International Baccalaureate, I attended Northwestern University, a liberal arts program in just outside of Chicago. So I majored in economics and did a certificate in finance through the Kellogg School of Management, which is the business school here at Northwestern. And since this was a liberal arts program, I had the opportunity to take all kinds of classes ranging from philosophy to physics, Spanish, and Shakespeare as well. So it was a very broad program covering a number of different subjects, which is really what I was looking for in coming to the US for my further education. And now, about 2 months into my first job, working as a research associate covering global public markets at DiMeo Schneider and Associates, which is an investment consulting firm based in Chicago. So mostly institutional clients that we manage their pension plans or other investment plans for them. So now to move slightly towards the heart of the matter, I think that I wanted to make sure that everyone in the audience is on the same page regarding the job market and job environment in the US after you complete your undergraduate or master's education, as it might be. So as soon as you complete your degree and go out into the job market, your visa status changes. So as a student, you start with an I-20 visa, which is the student visa in the US. And then once you complete, there's a 1-year period, which is referred to as OPT, optional practical training, which is an extension of your student visa and gives you the right to work, which is very flexible. So it can be either paid or unpaid work. And in terms of the time commitment, it can be full-time, part-time, or even a volunteer role. And it's even flexible in the sense that it doesn't have to be, for a large organization. You could be self-employed as long as you have the necessary paperwork in that period. It's rarely denied by virtue of the fact that it's part of your I-20. It's an extension to that. And you have to go through the process as an individual, unlike the H-1B, which is a firm-sponsored visa. Here you have to do it yourself with support from your university saying, yes, he completed this degree, and yes, what he's doing is somehow related to the field of study. It's not just a completely different shift from what you studied. The one flexible option that you have is if you did a STEM degree, so science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, then you have an extension of 2 years, so 3 years total with that OPT, which I think is a very prudent decision that USCIS, which is the governing body, made. And then usually after you complete your OPT period, you're likely to need either the H-1B, which is a firm-sponsored work visa, or a green card to remain in the US. And H-1B is historically a competitive visa. There's a lot of demand for it, and there's a cap on the number of applications that they accept each year. So, I'm not an immigrations lawyer or expert, so I won't spend too much time on explaining that, but I hope that this makes sense to everyone and brings everyone to a sort of similar level of understanding. So with that background, this is the OPT timeline. It's 150 days total. So at the left, you see the earliest date to file your application with USCIS, and that's 90 days before the end date of your program as designated on your I-20 visa, which will be a stamp in your passport. So that's designated as the end of the I-20, which is the official last day of the final quarter. Northwestern's on the quarter system. That might read semester if you're at a different university. And then you have your earliest possible OPT start date. That's the earliest date that you can actually start working on. And then, you have a 60-day grace period within which, if you haven't yet received OPT, you can still work in the US without facing any penalties or any risks. So that's a quick summary of the OPT process and timeline. Now I'd like to discuss more specifically about the experience in the US during this COVID-19 crisis. So I started work on the 10th of February, just about 2 months ago. That was a Monday. And, the first few weeks, there was definitely some discussion about the COVID-19 crisis, but it seemed to be more of a distant threat rather than something that was imminent and very nearby in Chicago and within the US. But we quickly started to see cases in the state of Washington, especially in Seattle. I think that was a nursing home where the cases really started. And then also in California. And then slowly we started to see the cases picking up in New York, which in the US right now is really the hardest hit area. About a month after I started work, the firm's management decided that they wanted to shift everyone in the Chicago and other offices to work at home, just by virtue of as a safety precaution, given the uncertain environment and how much we didn't know about this COVID virus. 21st March, so roughly a week after the firm instituted this policy, there was a statewide stay-at-home order by the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. And then about 10 days after that, he extended the stay-at-home period. So at first it was till the 7th of March, and then the 7th of April, and then he extended that through the end of April, which is currently, as the situation stands, when we expect this period to lift. But, it's a dynamic situation and things can definitely change. So that's not a deadline that we're really thinking about as, this is God's word and that's what we're going to stick with. So in terms of my experience starting work and, within 4 weeks moving to work from home, it's been relatively seamless. I think by virtue of the job that I have, a lot of it can be accomplished as an individual. And unlike, maybe a larger organization where you have a 4 week or even a 2 month orientation time period, DiMeo Schneider really encourages you to pick things up as you go along and ask questions as you come across them. So, it's not like the first 4 weeks I was going in and doing 8 or 10 hours of orientation every day. Within the first week, I was really contributing to projects that the team was working on and working with other teammates and colleagues on serious work rather than going through an orientation process. And in terms of the transition, it's been quite seamless by virtue of the IT infrastructure and connectivity tools that we as a firm have. So we've been incredibly reliant on software such as Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and Outlook to stay connected with each other. We have daily team meetings and firm-wide updates to make sure that everyone knows what's happening in the financial markets that have been incredibly volatile and are the basis of what we really do. Additionally, all travel at the firm has been canceled until further notice. So there's no, we have a number of reasons for travel, whether it's client visits, prospect visits, or due diligence of firms that we're thinking about investing in. All of that has been put off, and there's no expected restart for that we currently have in mind. So as I said, it's a very fluid situation, and we're sort of taking it as it comes along. More generally, I finished my time at Northwestern a few months early, but I'm still very connected with the Northwestern community. So these are some of the things that I'm hearing from current students about the environment, given the COVID-19 crisis. Generally, firms are looking to reduce internships or cancel internships much more so than they might be doing so with full-time roles, just by virtue of their commitment. And the way they're thinking about this is, look, we don't know how long this is going to last. From the firm's point of view, we don't know how long this is going to last. We need to conserve our cash to make sure that we can continue to function and don't go into a bankruptcy or something along those lines. So they see internships as really a cost-saving, canceling internships as a cost-saving measure, which is the background for this. So some of my friends have had their internships cancelled. Generally, it's been, far from the majority, maybe 25 or 30%, but it definitely is picking up in pace as the situation develops, as it lasts longer and longer, and firms prepare themselves to last through this for, first it might have been 4 weeks, now it's 2 months, and that period is continually getting extended. But that comes with a caveat, which is generally these cancellations are being seen at smaller firms or startups. Um, that's not a hard and fast rule. I have friends at, say, an American Airlines, obviously, which has been hit very hard, where their internships are getting cancelled. But at the risk of speaking generally, this is more restricted to smaller firms that don't have that organizational robustness to see them through this period. For more full-time jobs, a lot of the start dates are getting pushed back just to allow the firms more flexibility in terms of weathering the storm temporarily. And a lot of firms are starting candidates and new hires with concerns about starting within, say, an OPT period, allowing them to start remote work rather than starting in the office, or having them completely shift from one city to another, just by virtue of the risks that represents for those candidates or new hires. And then some firms are also instituting hiring freezes. So essentially what they're doing is they're saying, look, we're going to honor the current contracts and obligations that we have in terms of internships and new hires, but we're not going to be hiring any new roles that we don't already have commitments to. So essentially, this is again a cost-saving measure, and just to save money to make sure that they can last through this period of uncertainty. Looking at some data points that I was able to come across, this one is from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. It's a industry body and a very well-reputed source of data and insights in the US. All of these data points, I do want to make clear, some of them are a little dated. So even this, just from the 10th of April, 5 days ago, these numbers are certain to have changed. I don't know or don't want to speculate on the magnitude of that change. And as I mentioned repeatedly, at the risk of sounding like I'm continuously repeating myself, this is a very dynamic and fluid situation. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I don't want to say that these are going to stay the same going forward, and they're very likely to change. But as it stood on the 10th of April, of 226 firms surveyed, 64% said they're not revoking any offers, whether that's for full-time or internships. So, as I said, those cancellations are far from the majority. 22% are not revoking, but are considering it more as a cost-saving measure, and also, down the line, if situations worsen, then they'll see it as a last resort. And then in terms of internships, those, as I mentioned, have really been hit much harder than full-time jobs. About 12% of firms have a blanket policy of canceling internships. And then full-time recruits and internships, definitely the minority of just around 2%. And then the inverse, canceling full-time recruits but not internships, a very small number, 0.5%, really meaningful, not meaningful, given the size of this data. And then in terms of the summer 2020 internship, so what is the near-term impact of this crisis? Most firms are honoring their contracts. So again, a similar number, 217 of respondents, about 70%, 71% are saying that they're either moving to a virtual program or changing the nature of the internship by changing the start date or shortening the internship length. And then, another 30% said they're not making any changes at all. So that's, a major number of firms aren't really canceling or majorly changing their internships. And then some of them, the last entry, that's really coming from the hiring freeze that companies are instituting, reducing the number of interns that they're onboarding just by virtue of, the reduced headcount that they're likely to need in this period. This data point is from Willis Towers Watson. This is slightly more dated, so it's 2 weeks ago. And these are definitely, these numbers definitely have changed in that period. just by virtue of what I've heard. So about 812 respondents, 28% said they will or might freeze or reduce hiring. My speculation, which seems to adhere to what I've read, is that this number has gone up. And then about 42% have already reduced or frozen hiring, um, just as a policy to save cash and weather the storm. So these do come with the caveat that A, they're changing, and B, these aren't reflective of only international students on an I-20 or an OPT. These are more industry-wide, but I think they do paint a picture that is, let's say, concerning, but reflective of the current situation in the last few weeks and reflective of the trends that we're seeing in the industry. So the key takeaways, that I want all of you as part of the audience to really think about from these data points and my insights. Number one, hiring has definitely taken a significant hit, although it's not, they're not the majority of roles or firms that are really being hit hard in terms of the number of roles, the number of internships, or even the cancellations. There's definitely a serious impact that it's not something that we'd expect to have happened even 6 months or even 3 months ago, really, and something to be thinking about. Secondly, by virtue of where we are globally in terms of responding to this COVID-19 crisis, we don't yet have a vaccine. Testing is far from covering the mass majority of the population. By virtue of that, I think there's definitely going to be a trend in terms of retrenchments and cost-saving measures amongst firms for the next few months, for the foreseeable future, until things change dramatically. And this really will be linked to economy-wide developments. So, in the US and in other major nations, governments and central banks are stepping in to support businesses as much as possible. But businesses are also taking actions on their own to ensure their viability and that they survive through this uncertain period. And then, I don't want to speculate on the longer term changes in terms of hiring practices or how firms might be conducting interviews. But, there's definitely a certainty that there's going to be some change about, how these things play out. And then lastly, I think there are a number of great resources. So the first one is a very straightforward website called Is My Internship Cancelled? So this was created by a number of different current college students. And this is reported by students who have, had their updates to their internships or full-time jobs. It's updated very frequently, and I think it's a great resource and commendable that these students themselves took action. The next one is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, something that I mentioned previously in my presentation. And they have since they're an industry body, they have a sense of the pulse of the industry, both from colleges and employers, as well as just the reputation that they have, a great resource to have. And then thirdly is the master list of companies. So this is also a student reported resource. It's on blind.com. And then last is university specific resources. This is more pertinent to current students in terms of the career services or alumni relations that universities have in place. Those are great resources to be taking advantage of in these periods. That's pretty much it that I had prepared. So I'd like to switch over to the iDreamCareer team to lead the questions that the audience might have.
All right. Thanks, Kedar. Thanks. So before perhaps, we start with questions, just mentioning to everybody that please use the chat box on your YouTube video. Just post your questions there. So we have our team who will moderate them for you. You can go ahead and, ask your questions there, and we'll go ahead and put those questions up to Kedar from our end. So Kedar, we already have a few questions coming up. So, to start with, though you've explained it from a pretty, holistic point of view. So people would want to know your own experience, right? So, how did you come to the conclusion of taking up majors in economics, and why US specifically?
Sure. So I think there's two questions within that one. So taking them one at a time, just historically. Um, so economics, I took it as my group 3 subject in classes 9 and 10 as part of the ICSE. That was really my first immersion in that subject. And at that point, I think completely honestly, it was a little bit influenced by my father. That was his subject, in school and through college. And then he sort of pursued that for his career. Um, so that I think was my first exposure and really the decision that I took in class 9. But as I've gone on through life, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've realized that economics is really a powerful subject. It's not only about understanding how markets function, but really thinking about the behavior, whether of individuals in society or firms or even, entire economies or the global marketplace. It's a very powerful tool to build frameworks through which to understand the world around us. And it's a very adaptable subject in that you can take it to, think about public policy or entrepreneurship or, finance, which is what I decided to do. So that was really my motivation and my story going through economics. It's that framework that it's allowed me to build to think about developments around me. And then why I wanted to come to the US, when I decided to do the IB, it was pretty clear to me that I really enjoyed having a sort of multidisciplinary approach. I enjoyed taking subjects that weren't otherwise related. And, I thought that, yes, I'm very fortunate to have, a background that allows me to take up the IB and think about studying abroad. So I took the decision of doing the IB as opposed to going into ISC or CBSE by virtue of that. And I was very clear that I wanted to do liberal arts when I was in school. So that was really my primary motivation for coming to the US. They have great universities in the US with reputations that are really built on the ability to do the liberal arts program very, very successfully, combining different streams, um, whether it's economics, philosophy, psychology, Spanish, some of the subjects that I mentioned, all of them have been really world class. So that's, I hope those answer those two questions, Karima.
Yes, yes, definitely it does. Just to add to what you just mentioned, do you think that maths as a subject is really necessary or important perhaps when pursuing economics?
Absolutely. I think at Northwestern specifically, but generally speaking, maths and economics really go hand in hand. A lot of modern day economics, if we want to call it that, is around building models and understanding how regressions work, how statistics play into this, what the importance of probability is. So having a very robust math framework is almost a requirement for economics as it stands today. And this is, from my personal understanding, I think that as we go along, there's definitely going to be more integration between different subjects. So, for example, behavioral economics, which is, psychology and economics, that's something that's gaining momentum. But even within behavioral economics, having models through which to understand, the behavior of economic entities that you're thinking about, having that math, probability, and statistical framework is really key to making sense of those experimental analyses that you're conducting. So, short answer is yes, math is very important to economics.
Okay, all right, fine. And what do you think economist has a role to play post COVID-19? How critical it would be, and what are the important points perhaps for a economist to make sure of?
Sure. So, you know, economist is a very general term. There's a whole spectrum of roles that people who have studied economics have to play. So, whether it's um, someone like the central bank governor trying to institute policies to make sure that financial markets are performing, reasonably well, that issues such as liquidity or sudden bank runs aren't major problems. Finance ministers, also have a major role to play in this period of uncertainty to make sure that the average citizen is able to stay afloat, isn't really struggling for resources, and struggling to make ends meet. But there's also a role to play for people who are creating public policy or thinking about public policy, not only for the short term or the near term, but also for longer term structural changes that might be taking place. Then you could think about, in these periods, for example, there's been a huge shift to, say, an Amazon or a Zomato for deliveries of groceries. So people who are thinking about how to make sure that these organizations are performing within a certain framework and not um, acting in a way that's detrimental to society, that's another major consideration. So I think these are some of the major things that I'm thinking about. So there's the finance aspect, there's more the macro economy aspect with public policy, another aspect that you might be thinking about. So an economist has multiple different roles to play by virtue of really their background and the larger role that they might have. But I think that economics is really a central subject to be thinking about this entire crisis, and it has many different aspects through which it might be relevant to the situation that we're going through.
All right, all right. So next question coming up, Kedar. What perhaps would be your advice to Indian students now, specifically for people who are right now, in class 12th and who are trying to get into US colleges? So should they look in for a backup option in Indian colleges, and seeing that the perhaps market perhaps at US is very volatile? And maybe what do you think about Northwestern University also? I mean, do you see any changes happening in the admission process?
Sure. So let me answer the Northwestern specific question. I haven't seen any major changes or heard of many major changes in the admissions process. I do say that with the warning that I haven't particularly been involved with that from a Northwestern point of view. I'm happy to sort of lend myself to a resource. Historically, it's been to friends and people I already know, but through the iDreamCareer or other networks that I'm part of, I'm happy to be a resource for students thinking about Northwestern, other schools, within the US. So I think my email and my LinkedIn are probably the best points of access for that. And then specifically for advice I would give to students in class 12 thinking about coming to the US, number one is focus on your academics and specifically on your writing skills. I think that's a area that a lot of people struggle with when they come to the US, is just how much focus there is on academic writing. So make sure that you're thinking about how to construct a thesis sentence, how to make sure that different paragraphs are linked to each other. And I think that there's a lot of focus in the ISC or CBSE on writing, but less so from an analytical standpoint. Within the US, it's much more about developing your own perspectives and your own opinions, which is, in my opinion, something that generally hasn't been given as much attention historically. So that would be number one. Number two, I think, is think about your application as a complete application. Don't only focus specifically on different sections. Think about the academics as well as the extracurriculars, and don't just do them because they might seem impressive. Do extracurriculars that give you joy, that you're able to talk about meaningfully. It's not only going to be helpful going through the applications process for colleges, but also further down the line, when you're going in to look for jobs, employers generally want to see that there's a two-way fit between the candidate and the firm. So that's where, the ability to talk meaningfully about your own experiences and genuinely about some of the failures that you've had, what you've learned from them, those play an important part in that entire process, applying for colleges as well as going into the job market. And then, besides that, number three, I think this is just personally from my point of view, slightly later down the applications process timeline, once the decisions start coming through, I think there's definitely going to be a lot of disappointments, and it's a natural part of the process. It's something that I struggled with personally, not getting into my dream school. But given a sort of range of schools that you might be applying to, generally speaking, the outcomes that you're going to have aren't significantly different, and the prestige or name of a school, it's definitely important, but I wouldn't focus too much on that personally, just by virtue of my own experience. So I think those are the three main pieces of advice I would give to students. Number one, focus on building a complete application. Number two, focus on your academics, especially your writing skills. And number three, be ready for some disappointment, and don't be too disappointed, but also keep perspective. That's important. And then lastly, in terms of having backup schools, I think that generally people go into these applications having you know three categories of schools. One is the backup. Number two is the target schools, where they have a pretty high chance by virtue of their accomplishments of getting in. And number three is really the reach or the dream schools, where they hope or aspire to get in. Within that framework, I think it is important to have backup schools, whether it's in India or whether it's in other parts of the world where it's not as competitive. You're not seeing these 3, 4, 5% acceptance rates. So definitely be realistic about how you're applying to schools and think about other options throughout that process.
All right. I think those are pretty valuable inputs, Kedar. I mean, I guess, from a very realistic point of view, perhaps, seeing the challenges that could be there, perhaps what you say, pros and cons of the whole situation. So thanks for that.
Sure.
So coming to the next question, uh, what do you see in terms of an impact of immigrant workers in the US? I mean, how do you think perhaps there is lying any difference, if any, the way companies are reacting to immigrant workers?
Yeah, I think it's not a new situation in terms of the number of students that are coming in to the US or other countries, hoping to look for whether it's a better education or a better job, to put it bluntly. It's not a new situation. It's something that's historically been sort of something that's accepted, and firms are very aware of this. The numbers of whether it's Indian, Chinese, Korean, whatever nationality it might be, the number of workers that they're hiring from these different backgrounds is very high. That being said, recently there have been some changes to the process from a legal and um, immigration standpoint to the process for immigrant workers in terms of getting their H-1Bs. So there is a cap on the number of H-1Bs that the US government grants every year. And they also do have an allocation specifically to each nationality that might be applying. So, if you were born in India, then you have a certain pool that you're applying within. If you're born in China, another pool that you're applying within. So that definitely is a barrier to entry for some firms. And that seems to have become worse. I recently attended a talk by an immigrations lawyer here at Northwestern, and she's been working in the industry for 30 to 35 years. She has immense experience and a lot of depth to her insights that she provides. So she mentioned the fact that in her opinion, the situation has worsened in the last 3 or 4 years with the change in administration, and the situation has become significantly worse for Indian and Chinese born immigrants, just by virtue of the numbers um, of these immigrant workers coming from these two countries. That being said, firms are always looking for the best talent. They're willing to pay, and they have specific goals in mind when they're hiring. But similar to what I said with the applications for colleges, you do have to be realistic. And I've seen a number of friends not have any success within the US looking for jobs. Not the majority, but it definitely is a number to pay attention to, who didn't have success and had to look for jobs in other countries, or move back to wherever it is that they came from, whichever country that they finished their high school in. So there still is an immense amount of opportunity in terms of jobs, but the situation is, it's precarious and something to be paying attention to, whether you're thinking about going to the US or other countries for college, or whether you're in college already.
All right. Okay. So coming to the next question, what is your experience regarding the quality of exposure and education as compared to India? And in continuation to this again, what is your plan after completion of OPT?
Sure. My experience with Northwestern, that's all I can speak to personally. It's been very positive. I think, I came here with really the goal of doing a liberal arts program, and the level of academics, the level of student and faculty engagement is, just far exceeded my expectations. I have nothing but positive reviews. Some of the other elements of student life that really serve to expand my experience at Northwestern, and really my first time living outside of India, outside of my family home. Number one was just how diverse and international the student body here at Northwestern is. And I think that's something that, isn't paid much attention to, but for me, it's given me immense exposure, immense development personally, just my uh, personality and my ability to engage with people from, different backgrounds. So in my third year at Northwestern, I lived with five other students, and between us, we represented India, Italy, Canada, Mexico, Rwanda. So those are five very diverse countries. And then my closest friends, I have friends from Serbia, from Bosnia, from Cambodia. These are countries that you might not, think about as, when you're living in India, not think about as countries that you'd want to engage with, or not want to, but would be likely to engage with people from. I think that's something that I've taken an immense amount of value from. On top of that is just how robust the entire ecosystem on a university campus is. So, whether it's student debating, whether it's cycling team, that's something that I was involved with. There are just an immense amount of opportunities to engage with things that bring you joy, bring you that you're passionate about. And, universities are very cognizant that a university experience is not just academics. They want to make sure that everything is provided for as much as possible. Obviously there are restrictions on this, but I think that these are two of the things that I was surprised about coming, or not surprised about, but positively surprised about at Northwestern, that I derived immense value from, on top of the academic experience.
Okay. All right. So next question coming up from a student. I mean, he or she asks that what do you recommend a US or a UK to do masters, especially in economics?
That's that's a great question. I don't think I have a great answer for you. I think you should think about a master's um, really from a point of view of specializing in a specific area that you see yourself pursuing a career in. And whether it is the US or the UK, there are great institutions in both countries. I think personally, friends have studied in both countries and derived immense satisfaction, professional achievement from both of them. So I can't say that one is better than the other. It really boils down to, given let's say 3 or 5 schools in each country, which one has better resources for specifically what you're looking for. And another consideration, a master's is much more pre-professional than a bachelor's. Which country, or which country would you be looking to work in after completing that master's? Are there more opportunities in the US for you for whatever industry that you're thinking about? Are there more opportunities in the UK for you for that industry that you're thinking about? So, I'm not sure if this completely answers your question, but I think hopefully this gives you a perspective through which to think about this, and, a way to make that decision a few pointers that I would personally be thinking about.
All right. Thanks, Kedar. So I think perhaps that brings us to the end of questions that we've been shot through our audience till now. So just for everybody to know, so just in case anybody would still want to reach out to Kedar, you can go ahead and drop him an email or maybe connect with him on LinkedIn, and he'll be more than happy to help any of you, please. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
Kedar, on that note, I mean, first and foremost, definitely thank you. I think it's been a great experience. I'm sure students have been, what you mentioned as it's been a reality check, perhaps for a number of them who would be aspiring to get, maybe an overseas admission, or maybe looking at US in terms of their graduation or post graduation. So yeah, thank you, and I guess it's been a great experience. You've kind of helped us understand the whole situation pretty well. So thanks for that, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Garima and Ayush and the rest of the iDreamCareer team. I hope for the audience this has been valuable. And as Garima mentioned, please feel free to reach out to me, whether that's via email or LinkedIn. Happy to help, and happy to sort of pay this forward. I know how many people helped me through the process. I just want to make sure that I'm a resource for everyone. But yeah, thanks again for your time and for the opportunity. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Kedar.
Kedar, for accepting our request. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right.
All right. So for everybody else who's there on YouTube still watching us, do look out for the webinars that we have planned for the coming week. So tomorrow, day after, and then on the Saturday. So the schedule is already made available. For those who do not know about these schedules, so tomorrow we cover University of Sydney admissions and programs. Day after, on the Friday, we would have insights about the ACT test. And on the Saturday, we would have, Mr. Kunal, who will be covering about careers related to economics and financials. All right. So yeah, on that note, thank you, Kedar. Thank you once again. And thank you for everybody who joined us today. Bye.